Imagine spending days getting ready for Mother's Day, cooking a big homemade meal, setting the table just right, even using your best tablecloth, hoping this would be the day your family really showed up for you. Instead, you're left scrubbing red wine out of the carpet and picking up broken glass at 3 a.m., while everyone else laughs, gets in their car, and drives away without even a thank you. That's where this all started for me. But the real hurt didn't come until 3 days later, when I found out something that broke my heart in a way I didn't see coming. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, like your love and effort didn't matter, then this story is for you. You're not alone. And if that's ever happened to you, I'd love to hear your story too. Let's talk about it. I'm Sylvia. I'm 70 years old and live alone in a small, cozy house in the suburbs of Spokane, Washington. The house is filled with memories, especially of my late husband, Roland. He passed away from lung cancer 12 years ago, but I still keep his old NPR vinyl records on a shelf by the window. When the sun hits just right in the evening, it lights them up, and for a second, it feels like he's still here. I used to work as a financial analyst downtown, but I'm retired now. These days, I stay busy leading podcast discussion groups at the community center and writing a little blog about money tips. Nothing fancy, but it keeps my brain busy and gives my days some purpose. This year, I really wanted Mother's Day to feel special. My son Quentin was coming over with his wife Elise and their teenage son, Jasper. I hadn't seen much of Quentin lately, his calls were getting shorter and further apart. But I hoped maybe a nice dinner could bring us closer again. So I went all out. I roasted a whole salmon with lemon and dill, made a fancy salad with walnuts and cranberries, and baked a homemade cheesecake, 3 layers. I set the table with my best cream-colored tablecloth and even laid out some of Roland's old NPR records on the sideboard. Maybe, I thought, Quentin would notice. Maybe we'd talk like we used to, back when he was a curious little boy asking me how banks worked. But they showed up an hour late. No flowers, no card. Quentin walked right past me, already on his phone. Elise gave me one of those tight smiles that didn't reach her eyes, her fancy purse swinging as she looked around like she was judging the place. Jasper didn't even look up, just kept his earbuds in. I pushed the sting down and welcomed them in, still hoping the evening could turn around. Then Elise invited over a bunch of their friends without telling me. Suddenly, my quiet dinner turned into a loud, messy party. Strangers spilled wine all over the tablecloth, smashed cake into the rug, and left cigarette butts smoldering outside. Quentin laughed with his buddies like it was his house. Jasper barely looked up from his phone. Elise floated around snapping selfies like it was some kind of social event. Nobody touched the salad. Nobody noticed the records. And when I tried to ask Quentin about his podcast, the one I thought he was proud of, he just brushed me off. When I mentioned how much Roland loved radio, he snapped, "I'm not dad, okay?" His words hit me hard, but I didn't let it show. I just went back to the kitchen, trying to keep things going. By midnight, the house was a disaster. Wine stains spread across the rug like dark bruises. Broken glass filled the sink. Someone had torn the tablecloth. And then Quentin stood up, clapped his hands like a show host, and said, "All right folks, party's over. Mom, you got this clean up, right? Mother's Day, you know you're in your element." Elise smirked and put on her coat. Jasper followed them out the door without even saying goodbye. I stood there in the doorway, watching their taillights disappear down the street. My hands were shaking. And then I did the only thing I could, I started cleaning. I scrubbed wine from the rug, swept up the glass, scraped cheesecake off the floor. The smell of cigarettes clung to the curtains. My back hurt. My knees ached. But I didn't stop. By 3 a.m., I was down on my hands and knees wiping the last stain from the hardwood floor. I sat back, exhausted, and reached for the chain around my neck, the one that holds Roland's wedding ring. I held it tight. Tears filled my eyes. That night, I didn't feel like a mother. I didn't even feel like a person. I felt invisible. After they all left, I was just the cleanup crew. I dragged myself to bed, the house finally quiet, except for the soft hum of the fridge. I lay there staring up at the ceiling, Quentin's words echoing in my head, "You're in your element." He'd said it like a joke, like cleaning up after everyone was something I enjoyed. I thought of Roland, my late husband, and how he used to wrap his arms around me and whisper, "Sylvia, you're stronger than you know." But that night, I didn't feel strong. I felt crushed. Used. Like somewhere along the line, I'd stopped being a mother and had become, what? A maid? A doormat? I kept asking myself, when did I become invisible to the people I love most? If you've ever felt that way, like your love was taken for granted, like no one noticed how much you gave, then I get it. I really do. And I hope you'll share your story, because it helps to know we're not alone. But my story doesn't end there. The next morning, I woke up to a house that still reeked of stale wine and cigarette smoke. My back ached from scrubbing for hours, and my knees felt like they'd been through a war. I shuffled into the kitchen. The only sound the drip of the coffee maker. I looked into the dining room and it hit me all over again, the mess from the night before still there. The tablecloth was torn and thrown in the corner. A single piece of glass sparkled under the table, something I missed in my exhaustion. I just stood there, holding Roland's wedding ring that I wear on a chain around my neck, my heart sore from Quentin's words. I wanted to believe he didn't mean to hurt me. That it was just a rough night. But deep down, I felt something crack. Something shift. And it scared me. I needed to move, to do something. So I started tidying up again. That's when I saw my phone light up on the counter. It was a text from Quentin. No apology. No, thanks for last night. Just, Mom, I need $20,000. Podcast hit a snag. Can you send it today? I stared at the message, my coffee going cold. In my hand. $20,000. Not small change. I mean, yes, I had savings. I'd worked hard for them. But they weren't endless. I'd already helped him before. $7,000 for Jasper's school. $30,000 to help buy their condo in Seattle. And every time, I told myself, this is what mothers do. But this? No, please. No, thank you. Just a command, like I was some kind of ATM with a heart. I sat down at the kitchen table, the light catching Roland's old vinyl records. On the sideboard. His favorite one, All Things Considered, seemed to stare right back at me, like he was saying, Sylvia, you already know what this is. I thought about little Quentin, my sweet boy who used to sit on this very floor, asking why banks charged interest and how money worked. That little boy was gone. And the man he'd become? I wasn't sure I knew him anymore. Still, I tried to push those thoughts away. Maybe he's just stressed, I told myself. Maybe this podcast is his big break. I figured I'd clean up the last of the mess, then call him to talk. That's when I found it. Elisa's silk scarf was draped over the back of a chair. I picked it up to fold it, and something dropped out. A phone. Not her usual sleek iPhone, but a cheap, prepaid burner phone. Probably slipped out of her purse by accident. I turned it on, planning to return it. No passcode. Just one blinking voicemail. I hesitated. My thumb hovered over the screen. Something in my gut told me, listen. So I did. It was Elisa's voice. Calm, cold, clear. We're set to use Sylvia's retirement fund, about $450,000, to cover the $250,000 we owe the podcast sponsors. She won't suspect a thing. Just keep her sweet for now. I stopped breathing. Then a second message played. This time, it was Quentin. I checked the email. She's good for it. Just need a little time to convince her. His voice was casual. Like he was ordering pizza. Not plotting to steal from his own mother. I sank into the nearest chair, the phone shaking in my hand. My mind started racing, connecting all the dots I'd been too tired, or too trusting, to see. The flashy SUV Quentin drove last night. Elisa's diamond earrings. The way they brushed off my questions like I wouldn't understand. They weren't struggling. They were living large. And they were planning to fund it with the money I'd spent my whole life saving. Money I'd earned working overtime. Skipping vacations. Budgeting every little thing so Roland and I could have a peaceful retirement. So I could be okay when he was gone. That money was supposed to be my safety net. Now, it felt like a trap. With trembling fingers, I reached for my laptop and opened my email, searching for more signs, more proof, anything that would tell me this wasn't real. But it was. Every bit of it. When I checked my spam folder, I wasn't expecting anything important. But there it was, a chain of emails between Quentin and one of his podcast sponsors. One line from Quentin stood out like a punch to the chest, Mom's fund is our backup. If she hesitates, we can push the trust angle. The trust. My stomach dropped. Years ago, I made Quentin a co-trustee on my accounts. I thought I was doing the right thing, just in case I got sick or something happened. I trusted him. And now, he was planning to use that trust against me. I picked up the phone and called him, my voice shaking. I found Elisa's phone, I said. What's this about my retirement fund? There was silence on the other end. Then he laughed, sharp and fake. You went through her stuff, Mom? Didn't think you had it in you. I didn't back down. I mentioned the voicemail. That's when his voice turned cold. You don't get it, do you? This podcast is my legacy. You wouldn't understand. Then he hung up. Just like that. Left me sitting there, staring at the phone, feeling like the floor had been ripped out from under me. I walked into the living room, tears in my eyes, everything blurry. I touched the sleeve of Roland's favorite record, All Things Considered. His handwriting was still there on the label, for Sylvia, my forever listener. I clutched it tight. My chest hurt. It wasn't just about the money anymore. Quentin was stealing more than that. He was stealing the love I'd poured into him. All these years. The trust one gave without question. The years of support, of late-night talks, of sacrifices he'd never even noticed. I thought back to the party, the wine stains, the cigarette butts, the way he laughed as he left me to clean up my own celebration. That wasn't just being thoughtless. That was disrespect. That was contempt. I sat there at the table, the burner phone in front of me, Elise's scarf still draped beside it like a piece of her carelessness. Part of me wanted to call Quentin again. Beg him to explain. To apologize. To be my son again. But then, something inside me shifted. A small voice, quiet but firm, rose up and said, "No. I wasn't just a mother. I was Sylvia. I had built a career from nothing. I'd raised a child on my own. I'd survived the death of the only man who ever truly saw me. I was not a doormat. And I was done pretending that love meant letting people walk all over me. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do next. But for the first time in years, I felt something new. Yes, anger. But also strength. Clarity. Resolve. They had underestimated me, and that was their first mistake. The next day, I couldn't eat. Couldn't focus. My house felt like a museum. Of heartbreak. Everywhere I looked, I saw reminders of Quentin's betrayal. The wine-stained rug. The torn tablecloth. Roland's record sitting quietly on the sideboard. I kept hearing Elise's voice in my head, plotting. Hearing Quentin's words, casual and cold, "You're good for it, Mom." I sat in my kitchen, gripping a cold mug of coffee, staring at the burner phone. I was 70 years old, and my own son saw me as a piggy bank. That thought burned in my chest. And then, from deep down inside, something snapped. I'd had enough. I needed air. Needed movement. So I drove to the community center, where I host podcast discussions for local women. The room was empty. The mic sat untouched on the desk, dusty and forgotten. I'd spent years here, helping others find their voice. But somehow, somewhere along the way, I'd let mine fade. I sat in the old leather chair, closed my eyes, and pictured Roland. His face, his smile. I could almost hear him. "Sylvia, you're stronger than you think." He used to tell me that after late nights at the bank, or when he got sick, or when I thought I couldn't keep going. I hadn't believed him then. But now, I wanted to. I pulled out my phone and called Loretta, my best friend since college. She's 72 now, sharp as ever, and she's never once sugarcoated anything. When I told her everything, the party, the voicemail, the trust, my voice cracked. "I feel so small," I said. "I scrubbed floors for a son who planned to rob me." Loretta didn't hesitate. "Sylvia," she said, voice steady and strong, "you're not his ATM. You're the woman who built her life from scratch. You raised a kid. You kept going when Roland died. Quentin doesn't deserve you. And it's time you remembered who the hell you are." Her words hit me like a life preserver thrown into deep water. They pulled me out of the fog. I drove home. With a fire in my chest. I wasn't going to beg for Quentin's love anymore. I wasn't going to let them steal from me, not my money, and not my worth. I sat down at my desk, the window looking out over the quiet Spokane streets, and started to plan. First, I called my banker, Dave. He's known me for decades. I told him I needed to lock everything down. Every account. Especially the joint one I had with Quentin. It had $15,000 in it, most of it drained over the years by his emergencies. I told Dave to close it. And as he confirmed the transfer, I felt something deep and heavy begin to lift. Money used to make me feel safe, but it also kept me trapped. Not anymore. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer, Susan. We set up a meeting and sat down to go over my trust. Right there on the page was Quentin's name as co-trustee. My heart sank. I'd added him years ago, thinking he'd take care of me if I ever needed help. That was a mistake. I had done it out of love, hoping he'd be the kind of son who'd protect me. He wasn't. So I removed him. Instead, I named a nonprofit for women's rights in Spokane as the new trustee. My house, worth about $600,000, and my retirement savings, another $420,000, would go to them. Quentin wasn't getting a single dime. Susan looked surprised, raising her eyebrows, but I nodded firmly. My voice was steady and stronger than it had been in weeks. "This is what I want," I told her. She drew up the new papers, and I signed them without hesitation. For the first time in a long while, my hand didn't shake. But I wasn't finished yet. That awful voicemail kept replaying in my head, Elise sounding smug, Quentin cold and distant. They had planned to use my money to save their podcast, which was clearly falling apart. I couldn't just let that slide. I dug through their email chain and found the sponsor's contact info. A venture capitalist named Mark. I made a new email account, one I could stay anonymous with, and I told him the truth. Quentin and Elise don't have anything of value backing this podcast. They're counting on money they don't have, mine. Their whole project is about to collapse. Then I hit send. My heart was pounding. But this wasn't about revenge, it was about honesty. They had broken my trust, and I wasn't going to sit back and let them get away with it. 3 days later, the doorbell rang. I opened the door and there stood Quentin. He looked pale, like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were wide and panicked. Then he dropped to his knees like he was begging. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm losing everything. The sponsors pulled out. The bank froze my accounts. Why did you do this to me?" I stood still, arms crossed. This man in front of me didn't feel like my son anymore. His suit was wrinkled, his tie hanging loose, but on his wrist was a shiny Rolex, probably worth more than my car. I felt a flash of anger, but I kept calm. "You said I was good for it, Quentin," I said quietly. "You thought I'd clean up your mess again. I won't. Not anymore." He started talking fast, something about how the podcast was his dream, his legacy, how Elise pressured him, how he meant to tell me. I cut him off. "You made a choice," I told him. "You stopped seeing me as your mother. You saw me as your backup plan. Now you have to live with that." His eyes filled with tears, but there was something else in them too, anger. That same cold edge I'd heard on the phone. His fists clenched like he might shout or even lash out. But he didn't. Instead, he turned, walked to his car, and slammed the door. I closed my door too, then leaned against it, my heart racing. I expected to cry, to feel regret. But I didn't. Instead, I felt strangely calm. Like a weight had finally lifted. That night, I went back to the community center. I sat in the little podcast booth, the mic glowing under the soft neon light. I picked it up and saw my faint reflection in the window. I didn't know exactly what I'd say, but I knew one thing for sure, it would be my story. Not Quentin's. Not Elisa's. Mine. For years, I'd been blind, loving too hard, hoping too much. But now, my eyes were open. I wasn't going back. They thought I was weak. They thought I'd always say yes. That was their second mistake. In the days after Quentin's visit, it felt like I was waking up from a bad dream. The house, once filled with tension and sadness, started to feel like mine again. But I didn't want to stay. I sold the big craftsman home in the suburbs and moved into a small apartment downtown, just a block from the community center. It was simple, but it felt right. Clean white walls, a big window that looked out over the Spokane River. The water moved gently, and every morning the sunlight bounced off its surface. It calmed me. I only unpacked what really mattered: Roland's old vinyl records, my laptop, and the wedding ring I still wore on a chain. The rest, the wine-stained rug, the old tablecloth full of memories, I left behind. They belonged to a version of me I'd outgrown. Starting over at 70 wasn't easy. My knees still ached from scrubbing floors that Mother's Day, and my heart still hurt from what Quentin did. But I kept hearing Loretta's voice in my head: "You're not his ATM, Sylvia. You're the woman who kept going after Roland died." I held on to that truth. I got more involved at the community center. I led discussions about podcasts like This American Life. Most of the women who showed up were around my age. We shared stories about kids who stopped calling, about partners who stopped trying. Their voices were honest, sometimes raw. It reminded me I wasn't alone. Soon, I started teaching a personal finance class, helping retirees protect their money. It felt good, like I was giving them tools I wish I'd had. And I began writing again. Not just budgeting tips, but real, personal stories, about love that hurts, about giving everything and getting nothing back. I never used names. But the truth was there, clear as day. This was my new beginning. And this time, I wasn't anyone's safety net. I was just me, strong, wiser, and finally free. Writing helped me breathe. Every blog post I wrote felt like laying down another brick in a wall, one I was slowly building to protect my heart. I didn't plan it that way, but the words just came. And to my surprise, people read them. Total strangers left comments, saying they felt the same way, like they were invisible in their own homes. Their kind words helped heal parts of me I didn't even know were still hurting. For the first time in ages, I wasn't just Quentin's mom or Roland's widow. I was Sylvia. A woman with her own voice and something real to say. About a week after that last awful fight, I got a letter in the mail. The envelope was plain. The handwriting on the front was messy, but familiar. It was from Quentin. "Mom, I'm sorry," it read. "I was wrong to treat you like that. I want to make it right. Please let me try." I sat on the couch, the river shimmering outside the window, and read his words again. A part of me wanted so badly to believe him, to remember the little boy who used to hug me tight after school. But I couldn't forget the other part of him, the voice on that voicemail saying, "She's good for it," like I was just a bank account. Words are easy. I'd spent years cleaning up his messes, holding on to his empty promises. And where did it leave me? Alone and broken. I folded the letter and tucked it into a drawer. If he meant it, truly meant it, he'd have to show me, not just say the right things. Then came Elise with her own little act. A box of chamomile tea appeared on my doorstep, with a neat little card attached. Her handwriting was perfect, of course. Thinking of you, Mom. Let's talk soon. I knew that tone. I'd seen it at her dinner parties, smiles that didn't reach her eyes, compliments with hidden barbs. The tea went straight to the pantry, untouched. I didn't even read the card again. She'd called twice since their podcast fell apart, leaving voicemails about how worried she was. But her voice always had that edge, like she was more concerned about losing control than about me. I didn't call her back. I wasn't falling for it again. Then, something different happened. One rainy afternoon, my buzzer rang. I answered the door and there was Jasper, my grandson, standing on the steps, dripping wet in his hoodie. He looked nervous but clear-eyed, holding a plastic bag. I made something for you, he said quietly, handing it to me. Inside was a USB drive labeled Jasper's podcast. I let him in, still cautious. We sat together at my little kitchen table, and he plugged the drive into my laptop. His voice came through the speakers, shaky but full of heart. He talked about me, his grandma, the coolest person he knew. He said I'd taught him about money, about old radio shows. And then he said something I didn't expect. I'm sorry, Grandma. For Mother's Day. For not helping. For being a jerk. I want to be better, like you. I looked at him, this tall, awkward 16-year-old with his father's eyes but a gentler heart, and I saw something real. He meant it. But I'd learned not to let hope take the lead. I hugged him, not too tightly, and said, being better takes work, Jasper. You start by showing up, not just saying you will. He nodded, eyes serious, and promised to come again. I watched him walk off into the rain, his figure fading into the gray street. I didn't feel trust, not yet. But I felt something. A spark. A possibility. That night, I walked to the river. The air was cool and wet, and Roland's wedding ring, still hanging on its chain, was warm against my chest. I thought about Quentin's letter, Elise's tea, Jasper's podcast. I still wasn't ready to forgive Quentin, not when his apology felt more like guilt than change. Elise's fake kindness only made me more sure I was right to stay away. But Jasper's effort, it planted a small seed. I didn't know if it would grow. But for the first time in a long while, I could breathe. I walked home and opened my laptop. I started a new blog post. I wrote about second chances, how they don't come just because someone says, sorry. They have to be earned. They take time. They take proof. My fingers flew over the keys as the river hummed softly outside my window. I wasn't the woman who used to scrub floors at 3 a.m. anymore. I was Sylvia. And I was learning to love her, for real this time. The weeks after Jasper's visit found a rhythm, still shaky, but full of hope. My little apartment in downtown Spokane, with its view of the river, became a place I could finally breathe again. I threw myself into work at the community center. My podcast groups buzzed with energy. My finance classes grew each week, filled with women eager to take control of their lives. And my blog? It kept growing too. I wrote from the heart, no sugarcoating, no pretending. Just the truth. And people responded. Their comments reminded me, I wasn't alone in my pain. Yet even as I built this new life, Quentin's letter stayed tucked in my drawer. Elise's tea sat unopened in the pantry. And Jasper's voice echoed gently from the USB drive. The podcast still lingered in my mind. I wasn't ready to trust them again, not yet. But I also couldn't completely shut the door. Some small, stubborn part of my heart still held out hope. Not for everything to go back to the way it was, but maybe, for something better. Then, one gray morning, the buzzer rang. When I opened the door, there was Quentin. He looked nothing like the man who used to breeze in with expensive shoes and big plans. His face was pale, thinner. He held a worn vinyl record in both hands, one of Roland's old NPR broadcasts. The sleeve was creased from how tightly he'd been gripping it. He looked smaller somehow. Broken. Mom, he said softly. I need to talk. I'm sorry. And I need your help. I didn't say much. I just stepped aside and motioned toward the couch. I kept my guard up. The river outside my window shimmered under the weak morning sun, calm and steady, even as my heart raced. Quentin sat down, shoulders hunched, voice low. He apologized, for Mother's Day, for the voicemail, for everything. He said the podcast had completely fallen apart. After my email, the sponsors had pulled out, and now they were suing him for fraud. He'd lost the condo. The car. Even Elise, it sounded like. I messed up, Mom, he whispered. I thought I was building something big, but I hurt you. I can't take it back. Then came the ask. I need $30,000 to settle a personal loan. Just one last thing, I swear. I'll change. He twisted the record sleeve in his hands as he spoke, looking like a man at the end of his rope. And I felt like a storm was building inside me. Anger. Hurt. But also pity. He was still my son, and it tore me apart. I got up and walked over to the window. I needed space. I stared at the river, its steady flow, its quiet strength. I thought about that party, the wine stains, the cigarette butts, the way he'd laughed while I scrubbed the floor alone. I thought about that voicemail. She's good for it. Like I was just a credit card he hadn't maxed out yet. I turned back to him. You don't get it, Quentin, I said. My voice was calm, but firm. I gave you everything, your tuition, that condo, my trust. I stayed up all night cleaning after your messes because I loved you. And you repaid me by planning to steal from me. His face twisted, hurt, maybe, or just angry I didn't say yes. You can't walk in here with a record and a promise and expect me to save you again, I said. That's when his face changed. That flash of the old Quentin came back, prideful, defensive. You ruined me, he snapped. You tipped off the sponsors. You cut me off. I was trying to build a legacy, and you destroyed it. His words stung. But I didn't back down. No, I said. You destroyed yourself. You stopped seeing me as your mother and started seeing me as a bank. And now you're mad I finally said no. He opened his mouth, ready to argue, but just then, the front door creaked open. Jasper was standing there. Backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes wide. I hadn't even realized he'd followed his dad. He dropped his bag and stepped forward, his voice sharp. Dad, stop. We both turned toward him, surprised. Grandma doesn't deserve this, he said, voice shaking. You and Mom treated her like garbage. And you're still doing it. I was stunned. I'd never heard Jasper speak like that. I saw her cleaning that night, he went on. On her knees. While you laughed. I didn't say anything then, but I should have. I'm done watching you hurt her. Quentin looked stunned, like his whole world had cracked open. His shoulders slumped. Then, for a brief second, I saw something I hadn't seen in years, real regret. He covered his face and let out a sob. I'll do better, Mom, he said. I swear. Then he grabbed his coat and left, leaving the vinyl record behind on the couch. I stood frozen for a moment. My heart was pounding, my emotions swirling. And then I looked at Jasper. He was watching me, his eyes soft, but steady. I'm sorry, Grandma, he said quietly. I should have said something sooner. I pulled him into a hug, holding him close. But I kept my voice clear. Thank you, Jasper, I said. But words aren't enough. You show me who you are by what you do. He nodded, jaw tight, then left quietly. The soft hum of the river filled the silence behind him. Later that evening, I checked my email. There was a message from the lawyer representing the podcast sponsor. Quentin was being sued for $250,000 in unpaid debts. The email confirmed what I already knew. My tip had exposed everything. His lies. His fraud. But there was something else. Months earlier, I had quietly bought his debt. I became his creditor. He didn't know. I never planned to collect. Not yet, anyway. I just wanted to make sure he couldn't hurt me again. That I had the power now, not him. But as I read that email, I didn't feel powerful. I didn't feel smug. I just felt sad. My son was drowning, and this time, I couldn't save him. I sat down on the couch and picked up the vinyl record he'd left behind. On the cover, in Roland's old handwriting, were the words, "For Sylvia, my forever listener." I traced the faded letters with my finger. My chest tightened. I had stood my ground. I had protected myself. But this didn't feel like a victory. I didn't want Quentin to be ruined. I didn't want lawsuits and heartbreak. I just wanted the boy I used to read bedtime stories to. The one who used to climb into my lap and beg for one more chapter. But that boy was gone. And I had to let him go. I let him go. I put the record back in its sleeve and opened my laptop, starting a new blog post. I wrote about loss, not just losing people, but losing dreams, trust, and the life you thought you'd have. I wrote about choosing yourself, even when it breaks your heart a little. The words came slowly, like I was learning how to walk again after falling hard. The fight with Quentin left me feeling bruised inside, like an ache that didn't show but throbbed when I breathed. My little apartment in Spokane, with its view of the river, used to be my safe place. But now, it felt heavy, like his broken promises were still hanging in the air. I kept myself busy. I led podcast talks at the community center, taught finance classes, and kept writing, pouring out the truth I'd kept bottled up for years. But even then, pieces of it stuck with me, the look on Quentin's face when I said no, Jasper jumping to protect me, and the massive $250,000 debt I now held over my own son. Sure, I had my freedom now, but it didn't feel like a win. It felt like loss, mixed with a fragile kind of hope I wasn't sure I trusted yet. About a month later, I was setting up for another podcast session at the center. I arranged the chairs in a circle under the soft neon lights. That night, we were talking about second chances, using an episode from This American Life. One by one, the women around me shared their stories, tales of hurt, healing, and drawing the line where love meets self-respect. I shared a piece of mine too, not the messy details, just the feeling of letting go to hold on to yourself. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a little lighter, like I was finally putting down something heavy I'd carried too long. That same evening, I found a letter slipped under my door. Plain envelope. But I knew that handwriting, Quentin's. It looked steadier this time. I sat on my couch, the river catching the light outside, and opened it. Mom, he wrote. I got a job as an editor at a local radio station. It's not the podcast, but it's honest work. I'm seeing a counselor, trying to understand why I hurt you. I don't expect your trust, but I want to be a man you can be proud of. I want to earn your respect, not ask for it. I read it twice, my fingers tracing the ink like it might vanish. It wasn't the big apology I used to dream about, but it felt honest, like a seed planted in uncertain ground. Not perfect, but something. Then came a package from Jasper, a USB drive labeled Jasper's podcast, Take 2. I plugged it in with shaky hands. His voice, still young but steadier now, filled the room. He talked about his grandma, me. Said I taught him that real strength isn't loud, it's steady. He shared that he'd started volunteering at a youth center, inspired by my classes. I'm going to make you proud, Grandma, he said. Not just with words, but with what I do. I smiled, my eyes wet. Jasper wasn't perfect, but he was trying, and that meant more than I could say. Elise stayed silent. I heard through Jasper she'd moved to Seattle, chasing some new business dream. Left Quentin to pick up the pieces. Her voice, once sharp and manipulative, didn't echo in me anymore. I didn't hate her. I didn't feel much at all. And that, oddly, felt like freedom too. I agreed to meet Quentin, but on my terms. We met at a small coffee shop downtown, the river stretching out beyond the windows. He looked different, clearer, calmer, no Rolex on his wrist. He spoke softly, told me he was learning to live without shortcuts, trying to appreciate what he used to take for granted. I listened while my coffee went cold, and for the first time, I saw glimpses of the boy I once raised. Respect isn't a gift, Quentin, I told him. You earn it, day by day, choice by choice. I'm open to seeing who you become. But I'm not your safety net anymore. He nodded, jaw tight. Said he understood. We said goodbye with a handshake, not a hug, but it was something. A small step on a long road. That $250,000 debt? I didn't bring it up. I hadn't collected, hadn't sued. I held on to it, not as revenge, but as a shield, a reminder that I had power now. Maybe one day I'd forgive it, if he showed me he'd changed. But for now, just knowing I could choose was enough. Back home, I taped a note to my door. Sylvia's home. Welcome. It wasn't for Quentin. Not for Jasper. It was for me, a quiet declaration that this life was mine. I opened my laptop and started writing again. This time, I wrote about rebuilding. Not with big, dramatic moments, but with small, steady choices, like how a river slowly shapes its path. I wrote about love that doesn't beg. About strength that doesn't have to shout. This isn't the end, I typed. It's the beginning. Not because I'm whole, but because I'm enough. The next day, I led another podcast session. The room was full of women whose eyes carried stories like mine. We laughed, we debated, passed the mic hand to hand like a gift. I looked around. That room, at the river outside, at the little ring from Roland resting warm against my chest, and felt a peace I hadn't known in years. I wasn't waiting on Quentin's calls or Jasper's visits anymore. I was living for Sylvia, the woman who survived betrayal, and finally found her voice.